Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today for Cure Cancer's Researcher Lunch and Learn. This is our June edition, and we're lucky to have one of our new researchers, Dr Danielle Bond, who's at the University of Newcastle. Just before we start and ask Danielle many questions, a little bit of housekeeping. This session will last around 45 minutes. If you do have any questions, please type them in the chat box that you will see there on Facebook, and I'll weave those into the conversation as we go along. If you are tuning in from Facebook, you may also note a donation button or pop up there in the link. If you are able to, please do consider making a donation of any amount to support our cause. We deeply appreciate your generosity, and obviously it's June, it's tax time, so any donation over $2 will be tax deductible. Also, if you haven't already, please like and follow our page to stay updated for all our Lunch and Learn sessions. We generally have them once a month. Our goal is to raise awareness about the critical need for cancer research funding, and your support means a lot to us. These small gestures can make a big difference in keeping the conversation going and driving progress towards a cure. So excitingly, today we have the pleasure of one of the brightest emerging cancer researchers, Dr. Danielle Bond. How are you, Danielle?
I'm good. How are you, Nikki?
Lovely, thank you. Thanks for joining me today. Danielle's aim is to improve the long-term survival of older patients by understanding the ways in which leukemia cancer cells evade or adapt to cancer therapies, and testing a more effective combination of drugs that may counteract this process. We're here to learn more about her plans, what goes on behind the scenes of her research work, and what she hopes to achieve with the funding from this project. So first, Danielle, for those that may not know you, could you start by giving us a bit of background about yourself?
No worries. So I grew up in Maitland, which is in the Hunter Valley, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney, for those that aren't aware. I'm the eldest of 5 children. So I have 4 siblings that are quite younger than me, but all adults now. So growing up was very exciting and interesting and very hectic. But I loved it. And I guess family is probably the most important thing to me. In terms of my study, I have done most of my study at the University of Newcastle, which is our local university. So I did a Bachelor of Biomedical Science and an honours degree and a PhD there, focusing that whole time on cancer research in my higher education. And I guess to kind of learn a little bit about me, in my spare time, you'll find me spending time with my family and friends. I like to go out for dinner every now and again. Also like to get outdoors when possible. So I like to explore new places, go hiking, walking. I have 2 dogs and a cat. So I really like to take my dogs for a walk. I have a border collie and a little Kelpie cross Jack Russell. So Casper and Milo. So they keep me busy. And I guess I'm also a bit of a homebody. So I also like to stay home, have a nice night in with my wife, watching a good movie or a TV show. And particularly in winter at the moment, I've got a nice fireplace. So we like to get in front of the fire and watch a movie or something. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about me. And I guess maybe another thing is I really like to get out and see live music when I can as well. So I'm a very big supporter of that. And yeah, I guess that's probably enough about me.
I'm sure your dog rounds up your little Jack Russell, or is it the other way around?
No, the Jack Russell, rounds up the border collie actually. He thinks he's a sheep, I think.
Funny.
Yeah, and then we have a ginger cat, Lynx, as well. So better not forget him. He's
amazing. Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing some background. So you talked about how you studied cancer research. What took you there? Why? I mean, cancer was obviously a big problem. It's a big challenge. But why, right from the beginning, were you interested in cancer research?
I guess I have a really personal reason for getting into cancer research. So I was really close to my nan growing up. She was like a second mum to me. And she sadly passed away when I was a young teenager from bowel cancer. And so I kind of experienced what sort of cancer was at quite a young age. And at that point in time, I didn't know what it was, just that it was taking away some of my family members. And I didn't kind of realize it at the time, but I think now that I reflect back on it, I think that was a major influence in me kind of going down that career of biomedical science and research in general. So I was extremely close with my nan, and I think that got me intrigued and curious about what cancer is and how it works and whether I could do something about it in terms of trying to help people. But also growing up, I was really interested in just how the human body works. And that kind of led me down this career path as well. But also my nan and my auntie were really big on charity work and volunteer work. So they were always helping others and helping people in need. And they would constantly take me along with them. So I'd be going to Meals on Wheels and helping deliver meals to the elderly. And they also ran this aged daycare facility that I'd tag along with as well. And so I was spending time with elderly people and, you know, playing card games and dominoes and singing and all that kind of thing. And I think they really instilled the value and the real importance of helping others. And I think I decided that that's what I wanted to spend my life doing, was that I was passionate about helping others. And then this curiosity and in terms of learning about the human body and cancer, I kind of combined those two together and somehow ended up in a career in cancer research at the end of it. So I think cancer research and that career kind of tackles both of those passions and motivations of mine. So yeah, I think, you know, to answer that shortly, is probably my nan is what has inspired me to get into a career in cancer research.
And thank you for sharing that story. Obviously, she was a very important person in your life.
Yeah. She was.
Well, thank you. And your area of work is actually acute myeloid leukemia. Could you tell the audience who may not be familiar about AML what it is and why it's different from normal leukemia?
Yep. So acute myeloid leukemia, or AML, is a rare type of blood cancer, and it usually tends to occur in elderly people, so usually people that are 65 years and older. So it's a disease of our aging population, and I guess with people living longer and our aging population increasing, it's kind of projected that this disease is going to continue to be even more of an issue in the future. And essentially what AML is we have these blood stem cells that sit inside our bones, and these stem cells give rise to all of the different mature blood cells that our body needs to function. So for example, to fight infections and things like that. And with AML, what happens is you get these abnormalities in the genes within these blood stem cells. And what happens is you get all these immature blood cells that can't carry out those specific functions. And so we start to see issues with fighting infections and all sorts of things. And if this isn't corrected, essentially, it can make the person very sick and ultimately lead to death. So the reason, I guess, AML is different is because it's quite rare and mostly affects our elderly population. So most people will hear about leukemia usually in the context of young children, which are different types of blood cancers. And we've become really, really good at curing a lot of kids with other types of leukemia, but we really haven't gotten better at treating and improving the survival of elderly patients with AML. So we want to kind of try and get the AML patients up to where the children with leukemia are in terms of cure rates and response to treatment. So yeah, I think it's a type of rare cancer that's not, I guess, is a bit understudied and not necessarily always funded to the same extent as more common blood cancers or common cancers like breast and prostate cancer. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, and a couple of questions that have arisen from what you've just said, and thank you for sharing that.
That's right.
Firstly, you talk about how it impacts 65 plus. Why is that? Is it just the degradation over time, or are there other reasons for it affecting more elderly people?
Yeah, we think it's because so as we age, what also happens inside our body is that our cells will keep dividing essentially every day, especially stem cells, which were those cells I was talking about inside our bones that give rise to all of our blood cells. And so they're dividing and making sure that we're getting all those mature cells. And I guess every time those cells divide, they're prone to getting errors in their DNA. And so we can think of cancer as the accumulation of multiple errors or abnormalities in our genes. And so I guess as we age, we get closer and closer to the chance of one of those cells becoming abnormal and becoming cancerous. So I think that's probably why it's more a disease of the elderly and not so much in children. There is cases of AML in children and young adults, but it's a lot more rarer than what we see with the elderly population.
That makes sense. Lovely, thank you. And the other question that arose from what you were saying was about treatment. So you say that there is a lot of research and there's been much progress with AML in children and other leukemias, but why is this an underfunded and undertreated type of cancer?
I'm not quite sure the answer to that, really. I guess, yeah, I guess in general, rare cancers don't get as much funding compared to other cancers. But yeah, I guess in terms of treatments, the treatment options for this disease have not really changed over the last like 3 to 4 decades. And
Wow.
so, you know, I don't think that it's necessarily a lack of research per se, but I think the disease is just very complex and very heterogeneous, meaning that individual cancer cells are very different to each other, even within a patient's cancer. And so when we give one therapy, so with this disease, there's really only 2 treatment options, main treatment options. So when we give a patient a therapy, we might not be killing all of the cancer cells. So some of the cells in a patient's tumor might respond and some may not. And the ones that don't respond kind of just stay there and wait to start dividing again and make another tumor or cancer. So yeah, I think it's such a complex and hard disease to research. And because it is rare, it's really hard to get patient samples to do research on as well. That makes it very difficult compared to other cancers. But we really need to keep doing research to try and find better treatments that will actually lead to long-lasting effects for patients, because the survival rates are so dismal. I think 5 years post-diagnosis, oh, lights have gone out in here. Oh. Sorry, I'll have to turn them on, but it's come back on. So 5 years post-diagnosis, less than 30% of patients will still be alive. So the long-term survival rates are just so poor, and they haven't improved compared to some other cancers, which might have an 80 to 90% survival rate, like some of those childhood leukemias. So we really need to find better treatments.
5 years, less than 30%. That's phenomenal. Okay, it really is shocking. Thank you. So we'll talk about the treatments and what you're looking into at the moment, but perhaps for the audience, you could just trace a bit of a path for patients. So patients are diagnosed with AML, and what do they currently or generally undergo from a treatment plan at the moment?
Yeah. So once a patient's diagnosed with AML, some patients will be put on quite harsh cytotoxic chemotherapies, which is quite an intense regime and is only suitable for patients that are quite healthy and fit. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of AML occurs in our elderly population. So if they already have health issues or other comorbidities, they won't be able to have that harsh cytotoxic chemotherapy. If they can have that chemotherapy, they tend to respond quite well in the short term, but often the cancer will come back within 1 to 2 years. And And they can, in some cases, be offered what we call a bone marrow stem cell transplantation, where they can try and put normal blood stem cells into the patient and try and get them to make mature blood cells more properly again. However, the patients that can't have that chemotherapy, which is quite a number of patients, can't have the chemotherapy, and they're offered this other type of therapy, which is what we work on, which is an epigenetic therapy. And epigenetic therapies are used at low doses and are not cytotoxic per se. So they can help kill some of the cancer cells, but the idea behind them is that they sort of remove any abnormal epigenetic processes that are happening in the cancer cells.
Could you just explain what the word epigenetic means?
Yeah, no worries. So epigenetics is kind of this broad term that talks about these chemical modifications that sit on top of your genome or your DNA. And essentially they're really important because they regulate which genes will be switched on in a cell, and that will affect the function of the cell. So for example, epigenetics is really important during development when you have stem cells that need to be told what genes to switch on to turn into a particular cell type. So for example, if you look at the genes that are expressed or switched on in a skin cell, this will be very different to the genes that you'll find switched on in, say, a brain cell. And one of the things that influences which genes are actually expressed is epigenetics. So it can kind of allow access to turning that gene on or not. And so it plays a really important role in development. And then in cancer, that process kind of gets hijacked and used to the advantage of the cancer cell. And so what happens in cancer is you get these genes being switched on that shouldn't be, that would normally prevent the cell from becoming cancerous. So for example, it might normally prevent genes being expressed that will change the growth and how rapidly the cell will divide. And so you get genes being switched on that shouldn't be, and genes being switched off that would normally protect against cancer. And so the idea of these therapies is that if we can try and normalize those epigenetic processes back to normal, then we can kind of reprogram the cancer cell to become more normal-like. And that actually helps limit the growth of the cancer cells. And it actually, there's evidence to suggest that it also allows our immune system to now detect the cancer cells. And so we might get better clearance of the cancer from our own immune system too. And so that's kind of the epigenetic therapy is what we focus on in our research, or my research. And similar to chemotherapy, some patients will respond quite nicely. So we usually get, I think about 50% of patients usually respond. However, those that do respond, quite often, some of those patients will relapse in the short term, which just means their cancer comes back. And at that point, we have no other therapeutic option for those patients. And that can happen quite quickly. That can happen within 1 to 2 years of starting treatment. And so I guess my research is really looking at, can we work out how some of those cancer cells are evading or adapting to that therapy? And can we target that process to try and increase treatment response and try and increase survival of patients longer than, 1 to 2 years or 5 years? As I mentioned earlier, the 5-year survival rates are so low. But when you break that down to elderly patients, so if you look at patients that are 80 years or older, that survival rate at 5 years is like less than 2%. So it gets even worse with age, with increasing age. So yeah, we want to find a way to, I guess, improve survival for those patients, not just in the short term, but more in the longer term, with some drugs that hopefully are not too cytotoxic, so as safe as we can make them, but also having the desired effect of getting rid of the cancer cells.
Lovely, thank you. Just like to welcome those that have tuned in. We're talking to Dr. Danielle Bond at the University of Newcastle this afternoon. She is studying AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia, and particularly looking at the impacts and survival rates of older patients, so 65 years plus. If you do have any questions, please do drop them into the Facebook chat there, and I will feed them into our conversation as well. So essentially, in summary, what we're saying are these cancer cells are quite clever and they're adapting, or they're changing to seek the treatment. So you are looking at those that are changing in a way that you can have better outcomes for those patients that have either relapsed or that the current treatment plans aren't working. So what are some of the challenges with this research that you're doing at the moment?
I think I've kind of mentioned one of the biggest challenges is access to the patient's cells, just because it's such a rare cancer. So we don't get many AML patients coming through locally or nationally for that matter. And like it's a hard, challenging thing to actually get samples from patients. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. I guess the other big challenge is just the complexity of the disease. But I guess we have some really innovative and amazing techniques at our disposal to try and test that. And that's, as much as the heterogeneity or the differences between cancer cells makes it complex, that's actually what really interests us. And we've got these really amazing single cell techniques that we can use to actually understand what's different about individual cancer cells. And so as much as that's a challenge, it's also very interesting and very rewarding part of the research as well.
Yes, it's really interesting. We've talked about that before in esophageal cancer too, where that's, one part of the esophagus can have one type of cancer, but the cancer cells have changed by the time they've got further down the esophagus. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
So if you have a lack of cells or a lack of patients in Australia, do you find, like that, brilliant.
Someone's just walked in, sorry.
That's okay, no problem. Do you find that you have to collaborate internationally, or do you get cell samples from overseas at all?
We haven't got any patient samples from overseas as such. We do have a really great collaboration here locally with a hematologist called Anoop and Jetty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an amazing collaboration, which gives us access to some patient samples, which is awesome. We also, he closely collaborates with other blood cancer doctors around Australia. So we do have access to some patient samples through those collaborations, and also through collaborations with the ALLG, which is a national society that essentially banks a lot of blood cancer patient samples as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hoping to use some of those samples this year and in the future for our research. So yeah, as much as it's difficult, there is some samples out there, but obviously you want to have your research at a point where you think it's definitely going to work before you utilize those patient samples.
And how can the audience here assist you with that? So if they do have AML, is it about giving approval for their samples to be used in research?
Yeah, so that all happens, I think, through their hematologist, which is their blood cancer doctor. So I guess for patients that have AML or blood cancers, when they go into the hospital for their treatment or in correspondence with their doctor, I guess they can express their interest in having their blood samples or their bone marrow, which is where those blood stem cells reside, right inside our bones. They can opt to have their blood samples and bone marrow used for research purposes if there's anything left over after diagnostic testing.
Mm-hmm.
And also patients that are on clinical trials might also be asked for consent to collect samples for research as well. And so that's really what we'd love to have is, I guess, access to patient cells before they start treatment, but also during their treatment and after they finish treatment, which I guess is more likely to come from clinical trials where that sort of process is more controlled. But patients, I should say, can ask about donating their tissues to research, definitely.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So how are you progressing? What trends or breakthroughs have you seen so far in your research?
Yeah, the research is going really well at the moment. Just finished recently pretty much most of aim one of my project, which was really looking at testing. I guess I haven't explained this yet, but one of the processes that we found was allowing some of these cancer cells to adapt or evade our epigenetic therapy is by changing their metabolism. So we found that the cancer cells that were escaping therapy were making a lot of cholesterol inside the cell. Okay. So normally we think about cholesterol floating around in our blood, and some people have high cholesterol levels and take statin drugs to try and lower that high cholesterol, because if you make too much cholesterol or have too much cholesterol in your body, it's a risk factor for heart disease and stroke. So we found that these cancer cells were actually making their own cholesterol inside the cells to a high degree. So we kind of thought, well, this could be the way that they're adapting to the therapy. And if we can try and block that process whilst we treat with our epigenetic therapy, we might be able to block that process and actually stop the cancer cells from growing as much and try and potentially increase treatment response. And so what I've been doing this year with the amazing funding from Cure Cancer has been really testing that treatment combination in cancer cells, in blood cancer cells. So I've been taking different statin drugs. So there's a few different statins that you can use that are on the market and already being used by patients at risk of heart disease and stroke, and combining that with our epigenetic therapy and seeing can we stop the cancer cells from growing and being able to initiate these cancerous colonies, which is what we call them, which is kind of like the way that a cancer cell will start a tumor in the body. And so we've found one particular statin that works the best in combination with our cancer therapy, our epigenetic therapy. And we're literally about to start testing that in some other AML models, particularly animal models, where we can kind of more experimentally model the cancer and test the effect of the drugs on survival and treatment response. So yeah, it's really exciting, and we're really happy to start moving this treatment combination forward to see if it's actually going to benefit patients in the future, because I think it might have a great potential for that, provided that we can generate enough evidence to support that and obviously show that it's safe and going to be effective. So yeah, we're all about testing that combination at the moment to see if it will help people.
Well done on getting this far already. Quick question about the cholesterol. So the cholesterol that's generated within those cancer cells, can that then leak out into the bloodstream in the same way as normal cholesterol? So ironically, a patient may have a same issue as someone that's got high cholesterol because it's grown in their blood already.
Yeah, so I guess cholesterol can come into the cell from the blood. Yep. So cholesterol is usually packaged into these little vesicles from the liver, and then they go out into the bloodstream, and then cells around the body can take up those little packages that are filled with cholesterol and fats. And so cells can use that as an energy source and as a precursor for lots of different hormones and other things. But cells themselves can actually create their own cholesterol, which is what I was talking about earlier with respect to these cancer cells. And they can also shuttle the cholesterol back out, so they can export it back out into the blood. So yeah, it's definitely possible that while they're making lots of cholesterol, we don't really know how much they're bringing in to the cell and how much they're actually exporting or spitting out of the cell as well. And that could potentially, for example, like you said, might increase their risk of things like cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
It's linked to plaque formation and atherosclerosis. So, and we know that they're conditions that one of the major killers worldwide. So yeah, that's not something I've looked into, but yeah, it could potentially increase levels in the bloodstream as well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for explaining that. So you touched on the funding, and we've also touched before on how AML, particularly in more senior patients, is underfunded. What did receiving this cure cancer funding mean for you and your research group?
Oh, wow. It means everything, to be honest. I remember when I got the call from you, Nikki, late last year. It was a couple of days before my birthday, telling me that Cure Cancer was going to fund this project. And I was just so relieved and so excited, because I guess what people don't realize is the reality is, as early career researchers, we spend a lot of time applying for funding, and probably 9 times out of 10 we don't get the funding. Like we get used to the rejection, I guess. So when I found out that Cure Cancer was going to fund this project, I was just over the moon. It felt like an early birthday present. And it means a lot, because it's allowed me to not only keep my job this year, so it's partly helping support my salary, but it's also helping me actually continue with this research, because without it, I wouldn't have had the funding to actually follow up this treatment combination and test it and see if it might help people someday. So yeah, I think people don't realize how far their donations go, no matter how big or small they are. And I just want to say that it really personally makes a big difference. And this type of research is just really important to keep moving forward, because like I said, there's just not many treatment options, and the treatments that we have the effects are just not long lasting. They're not good enough. So we really need to come up with better treatment combinations, or even new therapies, to try and really increase those survival rates, because I don't think it's good enough at the moment for that population of patients.
And just touching on something you said there, I don't think a lot of people realise, and I certainly didn't before I started at Cure Cancer, is that without funding like this, you don't essentially have a job the next year.
No.
So everything you do, including your salary, but including your project as well, it just stops.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, I feel like it's one of the only jobs where you have to every year fight for funding, not just for your salary, but for the research that you want to do, for the actual work. So I've been on 1-year contracts for the last 8 years. So there's just, there's no job stability, or it's hard to get job stability. And so every little bit of funding that you can muster up really goes a long way and keeps that research going. And it's definitely a challenging career, and the people that stick with it are the ones that are really passionate and motivated to stay there and keep fighting. Because it's hard, but it's also very rewarding. So we have to constantly fight every year for funding to keep our job and to do the research. So it's really important.
Yeah, look, it's such a shame, isn't it? Particularly as you say, you've got to this point this year where now you're going to start testing your assumptions and what you've seen to get progress. And all of this brilliant work you've just done may never have happened either.
That's exactly right. I may not have had the opportunity to actually even get to this point. So I just feel really lucky to have this funding to actually be able to follow this idea through and see, does it have the potential to help patients, and can we generate enough scientific evidence to push this treatment combination into a human clinical trial and actually see, does it help patients? Because at the end of the day, that's my passion and my motivation. I want to make sure whatever I'm spending the rest of my life working on is ultimately going to help people. It's nice to find out new knowledge and find out how things work, but I really want to use that to help people. So I'd love to be able to see this through, I guess, to the end and see if it will help people. That's the ultimate goal of this work.
Yeah, look, and thank you for it's not easy, as we know, in the research world, and thank you, because without people like you, we wouldn't be making progress in cancer research. So we really appreciate that.
Thank
Um,
you.
just moving on. So obviously, your ultimate goal is to get to hopefully a clinical trial, and then you can look at better treatment outcomes for particularly more senior people that are suffering from AML. What are your hopes for the future around treatment for elderly patients? What are you looking to do more of in this field?
Yeah, I guess we'd love to see this research go to a clinical trial, and I think that has big potential because, as I mentioned earlier, the statins are already used for other types of diseases, and so we know that they're safe. They just haven't been tested in combination with cancer therapy. So it's something that could be put into a clinical trial and go through clinical trials quite quickly. So it has the potential, if it works, to end up in the clinic more quickly than, say, a brand new drug that needs 10 to 20 years of testing before a patient even sees that drug. So we're really hopeful that if it does provide benefit, that we can fast track it through clinical trials. I guess the other interesting aspect that's also a passion of mine is a kind of more new area of research in the AML space, and that's really using those single cell technologies. So at the moment, with our amazing single cell technologies, we can look at multiple layers of biological information inside individual cells. So we can look at what genes are turned on, we can look at the epigenetics, and we can look at other aspects as well in single cells, which we weren't able to do only 15 years ago. So I guess the technology is just rapidly evolving, and we're all trying to keep up with it and trying to use it to our advantage to help patients. So I think that's going to be really exciting to start to see that research unfolding that's really going to look at how individual cancer cells are different and how we might be able to tailor therapies to individual patients instead of just a one therapy fits all kind of model, which is what cancer research has mostly been about in the past. And we know that the same therapy doesn't always work for every patient. And it's probably because some cancer cells are adapting in different ways. And so we need to actually find lots of different treatment options to potentially give patients. The other thing I might just add is another keen interest of mine is looking at the cells that surround the cancer that aren't cancerous, per se. So we call this the tumor microenvironment. And so there's all these other, normal cells. We call them normal cells, but they're probably a little bit abnormal. But there's these non-cancerous cells around the tumors or around the cancer cells that we're starting to realize have a major influence on how the cancer cells grow and how they respond to treatment. So some of these microenvironment cells can actually support the cancer, and they can help the cancer evade the immune system, for example, or evade death from treatments. Wow. So yeah, a passion of mine moving forward is also wanting to tease out those interactions between the cancer cells and these microenvironment cells, because we know they're communicating with each other. And so I think moving forward with cancer research, and particularly with AML, we're going to get to a point where we're testing therapies that target that microenvironmental cells as well as the cancer cells and try and stop that kind of interaction. So that's something that I definitely want to start looking into with my research as well. And I think it's something that's really exciting in the space of AML research at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes me back to one of the comments that Professor Roger Riddell, who used to be our board member and is still on our research committee, he said that 30 years ago they had all these ideas, but the technology wasn't up to date and didn't allow them to do it. And what he's saying now is it's so exciting that the technology is in alignment with the researchers' thoughts and ideas. So now that you've got all of these different options to explore, because we have such wonderful technology that enables you to do your research better and more thoroughly than you've ever had before.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing the technologies that are out there and starting to come out in the future. I think it's just going to get bigger and better over the next kind of 10 to 20 years. And yeah, I think we're going to start to find some really amazing discoveries in cancer research in general. And, you know, like all of us, we want to kind of progress and move closer towards finding better treatments for cancer and hopefully for some cancers move towards a cure. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting career to be in, as much as I mentioned how challenging it can be to stay in and have a career in cancer research. It's also very exciting and very rewarding, and I think it's going to be changing a lot over the next couple of decades. So I'm excited to see how it all progresses and be a part of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing the incredible work you're doing. And obviously we will let people know how you progress as well. And fingers crossed that you get to that clinical trial and you have enough evidence to be able to do that and then fast track that treatment as well. Really appreciate your time today, Danielle.
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone on the call as well. Thanks for joining us today. Please come back again on Thursday, the 20th of July at 12:30. We'll be chatting to Dr. Susan Christo, who is a Senior Research Officer at the University of Melbourne. He is researching how we use immunology to solve cancer problems, such as the negative side effects of radiation therapy. So in the meantime, thank you. Stay safe. For those who've got a long weekend, enjoy it. And I'll see you again on the 20th of July.